The pot is the very first thing that captures your attention. It is not the woman who owns it, nor the fire burning beneath it, nor the smoke-stained kitchen walls that surround it. The pot is made of hammered copper rather than being cast. Its exterior is dark, layered with decades of carbon accumulated from an open hearth. The interior has been worn down to a smooth amber patina by a wooden spoon that has followed the exact same circular path on 10,000 different mornings. The handles are slightly bent outward, as if at some point in the past, someone gripped them with great force in a hurry, and no one ever bothered to straighten them back. When empty, the pot weighs nearly 4 kilograms. You could potentially lift it with one hand if you had the right grip, but you wouldn't. Not this particular one. There is a small dent located near the center of the base, a badge earned from some long-forgotten collision with the edge of the hearth. And the lip around the rim is stained a deep amber brown from the minestrone that has simmered within it across more winters than anyone still living has bothered to count. The outside carries what appears to be soot, but it is actually a compounded layer of smoke, fat, and mineral deposits from water that has been evaporating off this very surface for 40 years, perhaps even longer. The pot sits atop a low wood stove in a kitchen within the mountain village of Villa Grande located in the Oglastra highlands of eastern Sardinia. Here the roads switch back through cork oak, holm oak, and granite cliffs before finally dropping into a valley so incredibly quiet on a November morning that you can hear a dog bark from a kilometer away across the ridge. The first light of day arrives late during this time of year. The kitchen becomes warm well before the sun ever reaches the window. The pot belongs to Carolina Mellis. She is 87 years old. She is awake by 5:15. The wood stove in the kitchen is still holding a low heat from the previous night. She adds 2 pieces of wood without even looking, in the same way you might tie your shoe. The fava beans have been soaking in cold water since before she went to sleep. She puts them in as the last thing she does every night from October through April. After the kitchen has been cleaned, and before she heads upstairs, she performs this task. This is not a ritual with any specific ceremonial weight. It is simply what you must do if the soup is to be ready by midday. There is no shortcut that can produce the same result, and Carolina has no interest in shortcuts. The beans require their hours in the water. Everything good in this place requires its hours. I am going to explain why that matters in just a minute. First, let's look at the soup. She drains the soaked beans and covers them with fresh water. She adds rosemary from a bunch that hangs drying by the kitchen window, woody and dark, with an oil still strong enough to be smelled from 3 steps away. Then she adds 1 large onion cut into rough quarters and 3 cloves of garlic, unpeeled, until she crushes them with the flat of a knife. A piece of pecorino rind, the hard gray-white outer edge of the wheel, the part that most households outside of this valley would discard, is dropped into the pot without any ceremony. Finally, she adds olive oil, 2 good glugs from a bottle that has no label because it came directly from a neighbor's press in October. The fire goes up and the pot begins its work. For the next 3 hours, it will do most of what it knows how to do without her needing to watch it. The pecorino rind is worth pausing on. As it sits in the hot broth, the outer layer, salt-hardened and packed with the fat and protein of sheep's milk from the aging process, slowly dissolves into the liquid. It never fully disappears, but it gives the broth a body and a depth that transforms fava bean soup from something thin and vegetable-based into something you can truly press into and feel. Carolina does not understand the chemistry of this process. She simply knows the pot. She knows that a soup made without the rind is a different soup entirely, lighter and less satisfying. And she knows that a satisfied appetite at midday means she will eat less in the evening, which is her preference. That is the entirety of her nutritional reasoning, and it works. Carolina Mellis has been postmenopausal for approximately 35 years. At 87, she moves through her kitchen with a physical ease that a researcher who visited in 2018 noted specifically in field reports. There is no stiffness in her hips, no hesitation at the stove, and she possesses a full range of motion when bending to check the fire and straightening back up. Her weight, by her own reckoning and that of her daughters, has remained stable for at least 2 decades. She does not follow a diet. She does not count anything. What she does is cook the same foods in the same proportions, following the same daily rhythm she has used since she was roughly 40 years old. The ingredients cost very little. The preparation is slow and does not require skill so much as it requires patience. The portions are generous in terms of volume. The bowl of soup is not small, but the meals are anchored in fava beans, broth, and bitter greens, foods that fill you up without the caloric density of refined grains or large quantities of animal fat. I want to be precise about what I mean by that because it matters. Carolina does not count calories. She does not restrict herself. She does not deny herself anything. What she has, without having intentionally designed it, is a food system so deeply habitual that the concept of craving something outside of it rarely ever arises. You do not crave what your body has never come to expect. You do not feel deprived of things for which you never built an appetite. The fava bean soup is not a substitute for something else she wants more. It is exactly what she wants. The fava bean is a specific food with specific properties. 26 grams of plant protein per 100 grams of dry weight, and a combination of resistant starch and soluble fiber that slows gastric emptying and the rate at which the meal turns into blood sugar. After menopause, when estrogen levels fall, the body becomes less efficient at defending lean muscle mass and more efficient at depositing fat in the visceral region. Protein and fiber in adequate daily amounts slow the drawdown on muscle stores. This is not unique to fava beans, but fava beans, cheap, storable, and deeply embedded in the diet of Aglastra women across generations, are what Carolina has. The daily bowl of minestrone delivers that protein-fiber combination in a context that is slow-cooked, appetizing, and eaten at the beginning of the day. In the same village, in a different room, with a different routine, Antonia Pisano lives 3 houses up the same narrow stone lane. She is already back inside by the time Carolina's soup reaches its second hour of simmering. She has been in the garden since 6:00 a.m. Antonia is 79. Her morning does not begin at the stove. It begins at the gate of the terrace garden behind her house. There she grows bitter greens, fennel, and a vine of something with small dark leaves that she picks in October but cannot name in Italian. She knows it only in the local dialect. She knows it because her mother grew it. In November, the fennel is beginning to turn woody, but the cicoria, wild chicory, dark green with notched leaves and thick stems, bitter to a degree that would stop most people from eating them raw, is still producing. Antonia is out there before the full light of day with her scissors, cutting the youngest growth and moving methodically from row to row. Bend, cut, straighten, move. The path from the gate to the back of the garden is perhaps 40 meters on a slope of roughly 12 degrees. She makes this trip 4 or 5 times in a single morning session. She would not call this exercise. She goes to the garden because the garden needs tending and because the greens on the table at lunch require someone to cut them. The bodywork is a consequence of the task, not the task itself. This is a distinction that sounds obvious but is functionally enormous. When movement is embedded in purpose, it is not subject to the same motivational failure points that exercise is. You can skip the gym on a cold morning, but you cannot skip the garden if the garden is your food supply, your identity, and the thing your neighbors assume you are doing. The research team that spent time in Villa Grande fitted a cohort of older women with step counters and inclinometers over a 2-week period. The women rated themselves as sedentary before the study began. However, the data showed an average of more than 7,000 steps per day for women over 75, with meaningful incline components, meaning a significant fraction of those steps were taken uphill. 7 kilometers is not a small number. It is simply what these women do in the ordinary business of being alive in a hillside village. Antonia has a quote that I have thought about more than most of what I heard in that village. When asked about her morning in the garden, she said, "I go out before it gets too warm. In November, before too warm means before 8 a.m. In July, it means before 6 a.m. The sun is the clock." This is how a person who has never owned a fitness tracker describes a morning practice that has kept her cardiovascular system measurably more functional than her age would predict. Hold that thought. We will pick it up in a moment. The pot is still simmering. 2.5 hours in, the fava beans have begun to dissolve at the edges, thickening the broth, and the rosemary has moved from being intrusive to being integrated. Carolina has left the kitchen. She is visiting a friend 2 lanes over, as she does on most mornings around 9:30. The kitchen is quiet, the pot is covered, and the fire is low. The pecorino rind has turned soft and pale. The soup is working. Move with me to the next house up the road in the same village. Maria Pia Maru lives at the end of the lane in the last house, before the path turns into a track, and goes up through the cork oaks toward the ridge. She is 81. Her role in the daily rhythm of the village is social in a very specific and very scheduled sense. Every Wednesday morning at 9 sharp, the same 5 women come to Maria Pia's kitchen. They have been coming for what she estimates to be 35 years. The gathering has never been given a formal name. The women arrive, drink thick Sardinian coffee, real coffee, pressed dark, and eat a small piece of aged pecorino, perhaps 25 to 30 grams each, with 1 or 2 walnuts. The meal is tiny, but the conversation is not. It lasts roughly 90 minutes and covers whatever needs covering: children, ailments, village news. These 5 women carry between them a combined age of roughly 412 years. None has dementia, none is housebound. The research team that documented the social schedules of the oldest women in Villa Grande noted that these schedules were characterized by high predictability and low spontaneity. There are fixed points in the week around which the rest of life arranges itself. The authors suggested that this predictability was likely protective, not necessarily the talking itself, but the expectation of the talking. It is the knowledge on a Tuesday evening that there is somewhere to be in the morning. Here is the detail I promised you earlier about Antonia's bitterness. The absence of a craving for sweetness in Antonia, and in most of the older women of this village, is not primarily a matter of self-discipline. It is a consequence of a lifetime of eating patterns that never created the insulin response cycles that generate sugar cravings in the first place. When your daily diet is anchored in fava beans, bitter greens, olive oil, small amounts of aged sheep cheese, and wine drunk in a meal context, your body's baseline expectation for sweetness is low. When that expectation is low, sweet foods do not produce the same reward signal they produce in a body accustomed to them. Antonia is not suppressing a desire. She is reporting an absence of it. The body calibrates over years, not weeks. I told you I would come back to this, and here we are. The truth is that what Antonia described as a preference is also what the research shows as a protective mechanism. Consistent avoidance of hyperpalatable, high glycemic foods over decades is associated with preserved insulin sensitivity in postmenopausal women. But Antonia does not need to know this. She knows the soup. She knows the greens. She knows the garden. These 3 women are not isolated actors. They are braided together in a way that is invisible if you observe them one at a time, but becomes obvious when you step back. Carolina cooks. What she cooks feeds her household, and portions travel to other kitchens through the informal exchange system here. A jar of soup left on a doorstep, or a handful of greens brought to a neighbor who is not feeling well. Antonia's garden produce for Sunday lunch brings all 3 households into the same room. The exchange is not just material, it is observational. Because Carolina and Antonia have lived 3 houses apart for 50 years, Carolina notices when Antonia has not been in the garden for 2 mornings in a row. She will go up the lane to check on her. Maria Pia's Wednesday Circle is the informal information system of the village, where you learn who needs a meal brought over or who has had trouble sleeping. None of this is organized as care. It is organized as relationship. The care is a byproduct. Step back from the food and look at the day around it. The food is not the cause of what researchers find in Oglostra. The food is the content of a structure, a kitchen rhythm, a field rhythm, a social rhythm, that is itself the phenomenon worth understanding. Carolina's morning is organized by the soup. The soup requires the soaking, and the soaking requires the decision the night before. Antonia's morning is organized by the garden. The garden requires tending regardless of how she feels. Maria Pia's week is organized by her appointments, which are not optional because the other 4 women are coming, whether Maria Pia is in the mood or not. Each of these rhythms makes physical and cognitive demands on the body. None of this is exercise in the design sense. All of it is load, gravitational, muscular, postural, applied daily and consistently in service of something that matters to the person doing it. The load is not experienced as a cost. It is experienced as the day. Each rhythm places the individual inside a social web that provides something not easily named, but very easy to lose: accountability. No one in this village allows Carolina to stop making soup. It is expected of her. No one allows Antonia to let the garden go. No one allows Maria Pia to cancel Wednesday. The four other women would show up at her door. This mutual expectation, the fact that your daily practices are embedded in obligations to specific other people, is not a burden here. It is the structure. The research on this has been consistent for 20 years. Social isolation in older adults produces measurable physiological changes: increases in inflammatory markers, decreases in immune function, and acceleration of cognitive decline that are not explained by loneliness as an emotional state alone. The body responds to isolation as a threat. The body responds to consistent social expectation as safety. The soup has been on the fire since 5:15 a.m. It is now past 12 p.m. The three women and two of their daughters have gathered in Carolina's kitchen. The copper pot, the one with the bent handles and the dent in the base, the one you noticed at the beginning, sits at the center of the table on a folded cloth. Carolina ladles the soup into broad, shallow bowls. The fava beans are soft now, holding their shape at the center but dissolving at the edges. The broth is thick and amber gold. There is a heel of dark bread for each person and a small plate of Antonia's cicoria, blanched in salted water and then dressed with olive oil and a squeeze of lemon. There is a wedge of fresh sheep ricotta, white and barely salted, pressed from milk this morning and cut into rough pieces to be shared without ceremony. This is the meal. It costs perhaps €3 per person to produce. It took 3 hours to prepare. The eating of it will take approximately 45 minutes for food that could be eaten in 12. No one has a phone out. No one is standing. The conversation runs between the women in Sardinian dialect, which is closer to Latin than to modern Italian, and the laughter when it comes without warning. Carolina remarks at some point in the middle of the meal that the soup is still young. She means it would be better tomorrow, after a second heating, when the starches have had time to fully release and the flavors to compact. She says this not with disappointment, but with the mild interest of someone making a factual observation. Her daughter ignores it. She has heard it many times. Of the three rhythms we have followed today, the kitchen, the field, the social, which one is the most absent from your week right now? Not the one you think you should build, but the one that is genuinely gone. Hold that question. That is the one to start with. Not all three at once. That is not how Villa Grande built these rhythms either. These women did not design anything. They simply kept doing what was expected of them every day until the doing became the structure, and the structure became the life that the research eventually found and tried to name. The light falls early in November in Oglastra. By 5 you are in the afternoon, the ridges to the east are dark, and the valley below is already in shadow. The day has contracted. Things were accomplished. Soup was made and eaten. Greens were cut and brought in. 5 women sat in a kitchen for 90 minutes and covered the news of the week. None of this was called a health practice. None of it required a subscription, a gym membership, or a dietary philosophy. It required a pot, a garden, a kitchen big enough for 5, and the simple fact of having been in the same village long enough that your presence is expected and your absence noticed. Carolina washes the pot by hand with hot water and a rough cloth, the weight of her palm moving in the same circular path the wooden spoon made this morning. She uses no soap on the copper interior, as soap strips the seasoning, and the seasoning is 30 years of absorbed fat, minerals, and everything that has ever simmered in this vessel. She dries it and sets it back on the stove. Antonia has walked back out to cover the young greens with a cut piece of old cloth as protection against the frost that will come by midnight. Maria Pia has already left for her sister's house. A late afternoon walk she makes 3 or 4 days a week, 2 kilometers on stone streets. Arriving home before dark to set the table for the evening, Carolina fills the pot one more time before she sleeps. Cold water, dry fava beans from the jar on the shelf, measured with her hand the way she has measured them since she was old enough to reach the shelf. She sets it on the back of the stove, covered. Tomorrow the soup will be better. She is right about that. If this story changed the way you look at the simple rhythms of your day and the tools in your kitchen, please subscribe and like the channel. We are excavating the history and the daily habits that the modern world has tried to bury. Let's geotrong plant a better future together. The next treasure of wisdom will be uncovered soon.